I'm here at St. Stephen's Catholic Church in Portland, Oregon, and today is the 13th day of St. Michael's Lent. We continue with the Fioretti, the little flowers of St. Francis of Assisi, and chapter 21, a very famous story about a wolf, the Wolf of Gubbio, who was converted by St. Francis. Is that possible? A wolf is not a rational creature, and yet a wolf, like a dog, can be tamed? Well, let's hear more of the story. Chapter 21 of the most holy miracle that St. Francis wrought when he converted the fierce wolf of Gubbio. In the days when St. Francis abode in the city of Gubbio, a huge wolf, terrible and fierce, appeared in the neighborhood, and not only devoured animals, but men also, in such wise that all the citizens went in great fear of their lives, because oft times the wolf came close to the city. And when they went abroad, all men armed themselves, as they were going forth to battle. And even so, none who chanced on the wolf alone could defend himself. And at last it came to such a pass that for fear of this wolf no man durst leave the city walls. Wherefore St. Francis had great compassion for the men of that city, and purposed to issue forth against that wolf, albeit the citizens with one accord counseled him not to go. But he, making the sign of the Holy Cross, and putting all his trust in God, set forth from the city with his companions. But they, fearing to go farther, St. Francis went his way alone toward the place where the wolf was. And lo, the said wolf, in the sight of much folk that had come to behold the miracle, leapt toward St. Francis with gaping jaws. And St. Francis, drawing nigh, made to him the sign of the most holy cross, and called him, speaking thus, "Come hither, Friar Wolf, I command thee in the name of Christ, that thou do hurt neither to me, nor to any man." Well, marvelous to tell, no sooner had St. Francis made the sign of the Holy Cross than the terrible wolf closed his jaws and stayed his course. No sooner was the command uttered than he came gentle as a lamb and laid himself at the feet of St. Francis. Then St. Francis speaks to him thus, "Friar Wolf, thou workest much evil in these parts, and hast wrought grievous ill, destroying and slaying God's creatures without his leave. And not only hast thou slain and devoured the beasts of the field, but thou hast dared to destroy and slay men in the image of God. Wherefore thou art worthy of the gallows as a most wicked thief and murderer. All folk cry out and murmur against thee, and all this city is at enmity with thee. But, Friar Wolf, fain would I make peace with them and thee, so that thou injure them no more, and they shall forgive thee all thy past offenses, and neither man nor dog shall pursue thee more." Now, when St. Francis had spoken these words, the wolf, moving his body and his tail and his ears, and bowing his head, made signs that he accepted what had been said, and would abide thereby. Then said St. Francis, "Friar Wolf, since it pleaseth thee to make and observe this peace, I promise to obtain for thee, so long as thou livest, a continual sustenance from the men of this city, so that thou shalt no more suffer hunger. For well I ween that thou hast wrought all this evil to satisfy thy hunger. But after I have won this favor for thee, Friar Wolf, I desire that thou promise me to do hurt neither to man nor beast. Dost thou promise me this?" And the wolf bowed his head and gave clear token that he promised these things. And St. Francis said, "Friar Wolf, I desire that thou pledge thy faith to me to keep this promise, that I may have full trust in thee." And when St. Francis held forth his hand to receive this pledge, the wolf lifted up his right paw and gently laid it in the hand of St. Francis, giving him thereby such token of good faith as he could. Then said St. Francis, "Friar Wolf, I command thee in the name of Jesus Christ to come with me. Fear not, and we will go and confirm this peace in the name of God." And the wolf, obedient, set forth by his side even as a pet lamb. Wherefore, when the men of the city beheld this, they marveled greatly. And anon this miracle was noised about the whole city, and all folk, great and small, men and women, old and young, flocked to the marketplace to see the wolf with St. Francis. And when all the people were gathered together there, St. Francis stood forth and preached to them, saying, among other things, how that for their sins God had suffered such calamities to befall them, and how much more perilous were the flames of hell, which the damned must endure everlastingly, than was the ravening of a wolf that could only slay the body, and how much more to be feared were the jaws of hell, since that, for fear of the mouth of a small beast, such multitudes went in fear and trembling. Turn ye then, dear children, turn ye then, dearest children, to God, and do fitting penance for your sins, and so shall God free you from the wolf in this world, and from eternal fire in the world to come. And having made an end of his sermon, St. Francis said, "Hark ye, my brethren, Friar Wolf, here before you, hath promised and pledged his faith to me never to injure you in anything whatsoever, if you will promise to provide him daily sustenance. And here stand I, a bondsman for him, that he will steadfastly observe this pact of peace." Well, then the people with one voice promised to feed him all his days. And St. Francis, before all the people, said to the wolf, "And thou, Friar Wolf, dost promise to observe the conditions of this peace before all this people, and that thou wilt injure neither man, nor beast, nor any living creature?" And the wolf knelt down and bowed his head, and with gentle movements of tail and body and ears showed by all possible tokens his will to observe every pact of peace. Says St. Francis, "I desire, Friar Wolf, that even as thou didst pledge thy faith to me, without the city gates, to hold fast to thy promise, so here, before all this people, thou shalt renew thy pledge, and promise thou wilt never play me, thy bondsman, false." Then the wolf, lifting up his right paw, placed it in the hand of St. Francis. Whereat, with this act and the others aforesaid, there was such marvel and rejoicing among all the people, not only at the strangeness of the miracle, but because of the peace made with the wolf. Then they all began to cry aloud to heaven, praising and blessing God, who had sent St. Francis to them, by whose merits they had been freed from the cruel wolf. And the said wolf lived 2 years in Gubbio, and was wont to enter like a tame creature into the houses from door to door, doing hurt to no one, and none doing hurt to him. And he was kindly fed by the people, and as he went about the city, never a dog barked at him. At last, After 2 years, Friar Wolf died of old age, whereat the citizens grieved much. For when they beheld him going thus tamely about the city, they remembered better the virtues and holiness of St. Francis. And there we come to the end of chapter 21, a very dear story about the tamed wolf who became a gentle lamb. Well, let us continue then with chapter 22, how St. Francis tamed the wild turtle doves. He not only tamed a wolf, he tamed wild turtle doves. Well, let's hear more about this. A certain youth one day, having snared many turtle doves, was taking them to market when St. Francis met him. And St. Francis, who ever had singular compassion for gentle creatures, gazed upon those doves with a pitying eye, and said to the youth, O good youth, prithee give them to me, lest birds so gentle, humble, and faithful souls are compared to them in the Scriptures, fall into the hands of cruel men who would kill them. And straightway the youth, inspired by God, gave them all to St. Francis, who received them into his bosom, and began to speak sweetly to them. O my little sisters, ye simple doves, innocent and chaste, wherefore suffer yourselves to be caught? Now will I rescue you from death, and make nests for you, that ye may be fruitful and multiply, according to the commandments of our Creator. And St. Francis went and made nests for them all. And they took to the nests and began to lay eggs and rear their young before the eyes of the friars. And thus they abode tamely and grew familiar with St. Francis and the other friars, as if they had been chickens, ever fed by their hands. Nor did they depart until St. Francis gave them leave with his blessing. And he said to the youth that had given them to him, Son, thou shalt yet be a friar in this order, and serve Jesus Christ in grace. And so it befell, for the said youth became a friar, and lived in the order with great holiness. End of chapter 22. And we continue with chapter 23, how St. Francis delivered a sinful friar from the power of the devil. It fell out on a time, as St. Francis was at prayer in the friary of the Porciuncula, that he beheld by divine revelation the whole house surrounded and besieged by devils, in the similitude of a mighty army. But they could not enter within, because those friars were of such holiness that no evil spirit could come nigh them. And as the enemy lay in wait, one of the friars on a day quarreled with another, and thought in his heart how he might accuse him and be avenged. Wherefore, while he nursed this evil thought, the devil saw the way opened and entered into the friary and sat on the friar's shoulder. But the compassionate and vigilant shepherd that ever watched over his flock, seeing the wolf had entered the fold to devour his lamb, let that friar be called to him, and commanded him straightway to reveal the venom of hatred he had conceived toward his neighbor, whereby he had fallen into the power of the enemy of mankind. Well, the friar, affrighted when he perceived that the Holy Father had thus read his heart, revealed all the venom and malice he had borne in his breast, and confessed his sin, and humbly craved mercy and penance. This done, and his penance being accepted, he was assoiled of his sin, and straightway the devil departed in the presence of St. Francis. And the friar, thus delivered from the power of the cruel fiend through the loving kindness of the Good Shepherd, gave thanks to God, and returned, chastened and admonished, to the fold of the holy pastor, and ever after lived in great sanctity. And there we have the end of chapter 23. Well, we see here that St. Francis not only converted a wolf who became like a lamb, converted the holy doves, and the boy who gave them to him became a holy friar. But he also drove out a devil and delivered the soul and the vocation of the friar who had entertained thoughts of vengeance against another. Now, place yourself in that situation. Have you ever desired vengeance, to get back at somebody who disagreed with you? All they did was disagree with you. Maybe they looked at you in such a way. Maybe they gave you that eye, and you thought, how dare you look at me that way? That's pride. See all the good lessons we're learning from this little book of Fioretti, little book of flowers, that just need to come to fruition in our own spiritual lives. Well, thanks be to God for such a work. You know, this work goes back to 1322. How many centuries is that? That's 700 years. Go back 800 years to the death of St. Francis. Well, 700 years back to this work, or compiled 100 years after his death. Great lessons to be learned. Well, let us continue then to beseech St. Michael and all the 9 choirs of angels to drive out anything that is not of God from our own souls, to pray for all these various virtues through the intercession of the 9 choirs of angels and St. Michael. I've been told that I should keep reminding you that you can print out a copy of the prayers in the description below the video, and also follow along with another video to pray the chaplet with me in the church. Well, join me tomorrow for the 14th day of St. Michael's Lent and the continuation of the Fioretti of St. Francis. And don't miss a day of prayer with us.